On the first night in that beach house, I thought I had finally found a place where no one could walk in and tell me I had to give it up. I sat on the wooden porch looking out at the Atlantic Ocean. The wind from Sullivan's Island carried the taste of salt and the sound of waves breaking like a late lullaby. The six-bedroom house behind me was not anyone's gift. It was 12 years of working myself to exhaustion, living carefully, and swallowing every insult thrown my way. $4,800,000. Every single cent was mine. And yet at exactly 11:47 that night, my phone lit up with the name Victoria Hale Beckett, my stepmother. I had not answered her calls for 3 months. But that night was too quiet, and some foolish part of me still believed family could change. So I picked up. "Paige told me about your little beach house," Victoria said, without a greeting, without congratulations. "Your father and I are moving in tomorrow. Your father said it would not be a problem." I went silent. Only for 5 seconds, but it felt as if my whole life had been dragged backward. My childhood bedroom being taken away from me. Then she continued calm, in a way that was almost cruel. "The primary bedroom will be for your father and me. Paige will take the room with the ocean view. You can use the small room in the back. You are used to small things anyway." My hand tightened around the railing. "Can I speak to Dad?" I asked. "He is asleep. If you do not like it, you can find somewhere else. It is not as if you cannot afford a motel. If you have ever been looked down on by your own family in a place you sacrificed your youth to earn comment number 1. And if you want to hear more family stories where the truth always finds its way back, please subscribe to the channel." I did not scream. I did not cry. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone, but my voice stayed calm. "All right, Victoria," I said. "I will prepare everything for tomorrow." She hung up first. Victoria always did that. She walked into other people's lives, took what she wanted, and left without ever giving them a proper ending. I sat in the darkness. The waves were still crashing outside, but they no longer sounded gentle. At 12:15, I called my father. "Bonnie, what is going on, sweetheart?" I asked him directly, "Dad, did you tell Victoria that you and she could move into my house tomorrow?" There was silence on the other end. "No. I thought you invited Victoria and me down for the weekend." In that moment, everything inside me became painfully clear. Victoria was not just being arrogant. She had used my father's name to open the door to my home. And if she could lie that calmly, then the things she had done behind our backs might be far bigger than I had ever imagined. For the first time in 15 years, I did not feel hurt anymore. I felt awake. My mother died when I was 17. Her name was Eleanor Beckett, a woman with a voice as soft as late afternoon sunlight, and a habit of placing her hand on my shoulder whenever I began to doubt myself. She was not the kind of person who spoke often about love, but everything she did made me understand that I was seen. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in April. By September, she was gone. 5 months. That was all the time life gave me to learn how to say goodbye to the only person who had always stood on my side without needing a reason. My father, Gerald Beckett, was a well-known real estate attorney in Charleston. After the funeral, he did not fall apart in front of anyone. He simply worked, more came home later, spoke less, and let the old house in Mount Pleasant grow so quiet that sometimes I could hear the kitchen clock ticking. I thought grief would bring my father and me closer. But his grief was like a locked door, and I was too young to know how to knock. 2 years later, my father married Victoria Hale. At first, she did everything gracefully. She brought lemon cake to Sunday dinners, called me sweetheart, in a voice so sweet, I once believed it was real. She remembered my exam dates, asked whether I needed a new dress, and even stood in the kitchen saying my mother must have been so proud of me. I wanted to believe her. A girl who has lost her mother always has one soft place that can be fooled by anyone who knows how to use a gentle voice at the right time. But 6 months after the wedding, the lemon cake disappeared. The way she looked at me changed too. It was no longer the gaze of someone trying to become part of a family. It was the gaze of someone taking inventory of what needed to be removed. The first thing was my room. It was the room that looked out over the old oak tree behind the house, with a window seat. My mother had designed herself so I could sit there and read. Every scratch on the wooden floor, every corner of the wall covered with old photos, was one remaining piece of my childhood, after my mother was gone. One evening, Victoria placed her hand on Paige's shoulder, her own daughter, and told my father that Paige needed a proper dressing room. She looked at me and smiled as if she were suggesting we switch desserts. Bonnie can move to the small room at the end of the hall. She is strong. I looked at my father, waiting for him to say no. He only squeezed my shoulder gently. It is just a room, sweetheart. But it is never just a room. That was the first time I understood that in this house, my mother's memories could be cleared away whenever Victoria decided they were in the way. After the room, everything did not collapse all at once. It simply slipped away little by little, so slowly that if I reacted, I would look like I was overreacting. That was Victoria's most dangerous talent. She did not push me out of the family with one massive blow. She did it through small changes, gentle comments, and smiles polite enough that outsiders would never see the cruelty underneath. On Christmas, in 2011, I walked down to the living room and saw everyone taking photos in front of the fireplace. My father stood beside Victoria. Paige stood between them, wearing the red velvet dress my father had just bought her. The Christmas tree behind them glittered with golden lights, and on the table sat the silver frame my mother used every year for the family photo. I asked, where should I stand? Victoria turned around, her eyes widening with fake surprise. Oh, Bonnie, I thought you said you did not want to be in the photo. I had never said that. But my father had already given an awkward laugh. The photographer had already lifted the camera, and Paige had already tilted her head against her mother's shoulder. I stood outside the frame, my hands going cold inside my sweater pockets, watching them smile like a complete family. That photo stayed hanging in my father's house for years. Every time I saw it, I felt the strange ache that I had not merely been forgotten for one evening. I had been edited out of my own story. Then came college. I earned a full scholarship to the College of Charleston. I worked part-time at a bookstore, tutored statistics in the evenings, and ate boxed noodles in my dorm room, so I would not have to ask my father for money. Paige went to a private college in Savannah. Tuition, apartment, car, clothes, all of it was paid for by my father. When I asked why things were so different, my father had not even answered before Victoria set down her tea. Bonnie likes being independent. We should not take that away from her. She always spoke as if abandoning me was a form of respect. Victoria's favorite line was, I am not cruel. I am just practical. She used it when she changed family dinner plans without telling me. She used it when she said there was not enough room for me during the holidays. She used it when she said Paige needed more support because she was sensitive while I could take care of myself. It took me years to understand that every time she called me strong, she was really giving herself permission to hurt me without feeling guilty. But invisibility has another side. When no one asks where you are going, you can go very far. When no one cares what you are doing, you can quietly build a life that does not need their applause. I studied, worked, saved, and stayed silent. Not because I was weak, but because I was growing beyond their control. After graduating with honors in finance, I took my first job at Meridian Strategy Group, a small consulting firm in downtown Charleston. My title back then was ordinary. Junior analyst. The salary was not enough to make anyone in my father's house pay attention. Victoria certainly did not ask. To her, I was just Bonnie, the stepdaughter who was used to being independent, who wore clothes from Target, drove an old Honda, and showed up at family dinners like a tiny punctuation mark on the edge of every story about Paige. But at work, people began to say my name differently. For the first 3 years, I learned to read financial reports, the way other people read human moods. I saw fear behind falling numbers, arrogance behind bad investments, and lies hidden inside balance sheets. I worked late, drank cold coffee, and sometimes fell asleep in my office chair. But every completed project pulled me further away from the girl who once stood outside the Christmas photograph. By my 7th year, I had become a senior strategy advisor, managing restructuring projects for companies with hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. When I walked into a conference room, men 20 years older than me had to sit still and listen. Not because they felt sorry for me, because I knew exactly what I was talking about. My income rose year after year. Salary, bonuses, consulting, equity, all of it added up until even I sometimes had to look at my account statements twice. But I did not change the way I lived. I still stayed in my small apartment, cooked for myself, bought things on sale, and let most of my money flow into index funds and rental properties. I bought a duplex in West Ashley, then a townhouse near the medical district. No one in my family knew. At the rare family dinners where I was invited, Victoria still waved her hand whenever someone mentioned my work. "Bonnie does something with spreadsheets," she said, then turned to Paige. "Tell everyone about your new marketing campaign." I smiled. I let her believe I was small. That was the only gift Victoria ever gave me by accident. Her contempt gave me the perfect shadow to grow in. By the beginning of 2025, my net worth had passed $5 million. But my body began to fight back. I could not sleep. My heart raced. My chest felt heavy as if an invisible hand were pressing down on it. The doctor told me I needed to stop for at least 6 months. On the day I left Meridian, I did not know what I would do next until I remembered my mother's dream. A little house by the sea. A week later, I found it on Sullivan's Island. It was not little. It was not cheap. But for the first time in my life, I did not ask anyone whether I was allowed to want it. I put down almost $1 million for the house on Sullivan's Island in early March and closed the deal less than 3 weeks later. When I signed the final contract, my hand did not shake. Maybe because over the 12 years before that, I had learned very clearly how one signature could change the direction of a life. The house had 6 bedrooms, white-painted wooden walls, a wide porch and windows that looked straight out at the ocean. The realtor said this was the kind of property that rarely appeared on the market. I only heard half of that sentence. The other half of my mind was filled with my mother's voice, the way she once said that one day she wanted to wake up to the sound of waves. My mother never got that day. So I bought it for both of us. On the first day I moved in, I did not bring much. Books, clothes, a desk, and an old photograph of my mother and me in the backyard of the Mount Pleasant house. I placed the photo on the mantel. In that moment, the huge house no longer felt empty. It had memory. It had breath. It had me. I did not tell my family. Not because I wanted to hide my success, but because I was too tired of having to protect the things I loved from Victoria's hands. I only wanted a few quiet weeks, a few mornings drinking coffee on the porch, a few nights of sleeping without jolting awake because of my phone. But Paige saw me in a story posted by an acquaintance. It was only a glimpse of me passing in the background beside a white fence near the beach. Still, it was enough for her to recognize me. Enough for the news to travel back to Victoria faster than the sea wind. And that was why Victoria called on the very first night. After she announced that she was moving in, after she divided the bedrooms in my house as if she were choosing seats at a restaurant, I called my father. He said he knew nothing about it. Victoria had told him that I was the one who had invited them down for the weekend. I sat motionless with the phone in my hand. A small lie from the outside might have looked like nothing more than the controlling habit of a spoiled woman. But I had worked in consulting long enough to know one thing. People do not begin by forging major decisions. They rehearse first with little sentences, like he already agreed with the quiet habit of borrowing someone else's name to open a door that does not belong to them. If Victoria could use my father's voice to enter my home, what else had she used his signature for? That question stayed with me all night. By morning, when the sun had just risen over the edge of the ocean, I called Marcus Trent, my personal attorney. I only said, Marcus, that copy of the transfer deed for the Mount Pleasant house, the one where you once questioned my father's signature. I need to review it again today. On the other end of the line, Marcus went silent for a beat. Then he said, "So you are finally ready, Bonnie." I looked back at the house behind me, the place Victoria thought she was about to enter as if she owned it. "No," I said. "I am just done, giving things up." At 9:30 that morning, Marcus sent me an encrypted file. I opened my laptop in my new office where the smell of fresh paint wood and sea salt still lingered, and then I saw the name that made my chest go cold. Hale Premier Properties, LLC. It was the company listed as the recipient of the family house in Mount Pleasant, valued at $1,200,000. The house where my mother had once planted hydrangeas beneath the kitchen window. The house where I used to sit on the window seat reading, waiting for her to call me down for dinner. On paper, the person transferring the property was Gerald Beckett, my father. But the signature at the bottom of the page was wrong. At first glance, the G in Gerald was missing its familiar curve. The first stroke was too heavy, while the final stroke was strangely light, as if someone had been drawing the shape of a name rather than truly signing it. I pulled up copies of my father's will, his medical power of attorney, and a birthday card he had sent me 2 years earlier. I placed the signatures side by side on the screen. The longer I looked, the slower my heart seemed to beat. Not because I was calm, but because the shock had fallen straight into the coldest part of me. Marcus called soon after. "This is not a sloppy signature from a tired day," he said. "This is a simulation. Someone practiced copying your father's signature." I asked Victoria. The company that received the house was registered under her maiden name. The sole member is Victoria R. Heil. Your father's name is not there. No one else's name is there either. I looked out at the ocean. The waves were still white and calm, as if no one had ever used paperwork to steal the memories of a family. Marcus continued, his voice lower now. "Bonnie, there is something else. I found signs of 3 withdrawals from your father's retirement account. Altogether about $380,000 transferred to a bank account under the name V. Heil." I could not speak right away. A house could be greed. A retirement account drained in secret was predation. My father had once suffered a mild heart attack. He trusted Victoria to handle the paperwork because he was tired, because he did not want to argue, because he believed marriage was a place where trust could be set down without being guarded. She had turned that trust into a key. Marcus suggested hiring Patricia Sloan, a document examination expert who had testified in many federal cases. If she confirmed that the signature was forged, the evidence would no longer be just a daughter's suspicion. It would be strong enough to stand in court. I agreed immediately. When I hung up, I heard the sound of cars outside. 2 black SUVs were stopping in front of the gate. Victoria had arrived a day earlier than she said she would. I closed my laptop, placed the documents into an encrypted drive, and walked downstairs. This time I was not going out to greet guests. I was going out to get a clear look at the woman who had believed she could take everything from my family without anyone noticing. Victoria stepped out of the first SUV as if she had arrived to collect the keys to a resort she had already booked. Her sunglasses rested on her platinum hair, and an expensive leather bag hung from her hand. She looked at my house from the porch to the glass doors, and then said something that made my father lower his head. "It will do. For a first house, this is acceptable. $4,800,000. 12 years of my life." And in Victoria's mouth, it was merely acceptable. Paige got out of the car after her mother, her eyes already fixed on the upstairs bedroom with the balcony facing the ocean. She did not ask if I was all right. She did not congratulate me. She did not say the house was beautiful. She simply turned to Victoria and asked, "Can I take that room?" Victoria smiled. "Of course, darling." My father stood behind them carrying a small travel bag, looking like a man who had been placed by mistake into someone else's life. As he passed me, he whispered, "I'm sorry." I shook my head very slightly. Not now. Within 1 hour, Victoria had taken over the primary bedroom. My clothes were piled in the hallway. Her dresses were hanging in the closet as if they had always had the right to be there. Paige dragged her suitcase into the room, facing the ocean, opened the balcony door, and laughed at the sound of the waves. And I was directed by Victoria to the small room on the first floor, the one I had planned to use for storing towels. "This room suits you better," she said. Quiet, discreet, and out of everyone's way. Inside my own house, I had been placed in the most hidden corner. If it were you, would you throw them out immediately or stay quiet until the truth became strong enough that no one could deny it? Comment 1 if you would throw them out right away. Comment 2 if you would wait for evidence. And if you want to follow Bonnie's next reversal, please subscribe to the channel. That evening, Victoria invited 3 couples over for dinner without asking me. She used my wine, the food I had bought, and the kitchen I had just organized. Then she walked them through each room as if she were the woman of the house. "Gerald always wanted a beach house," she said. "I simply helped him make that dream come true." None of them looked at me. I stood beside the sink, holding a dish towel, listening as strangers praised Victoria's taste. One woman asked whether I was the new housekeeper. Victoria laughed before I could answer. "No, this is Bonnie, Gerald's daughter from his first marriage. She is taking some time off." A little lost after leaving her small job, I placed the last plate on the rack. It did not break. It did not fall. At exactly 9:47 that night, my phone vibrated. An email from Marcus. Patricia Sloan had reached a preliminary conclusion. The signature on the transfer deed for the Mount Pleasant house was highly likely to be forged. I dried my hands and smiled at Victoria from across the kitchen. She thought she had just moved into my house. In truth, she had just stepped into the trap her own greed had built. That night, after the entire house had fallen quiet, I sat in the small room on the first floor with my laptop on my knees, still hearing Victoria's laughter drifting down from my primary bedroom. She was on the phone with someone saying that this beach house had finally made life feel easier. I did not know what I was in her version of the story. Maybe an old piece of furniture that had not been moved out yet. At 11, Marcus sent a second email. The subject line held only a few words. "Call me tomorrow morning." This is bigger than we thought. I did not sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, letting the sound of the waves outside stand in for my breathing. The anger inside me did not flare like fire. It was cold, slow, and clear as a blade under a light. The next morning, I walked down to the beach before Victoria woke up. The sand was wet, the sky was gray, and each wave crawled close to the tips of my shoes. I called Marcus from the water's edge, where the sound of the ocean could cover every word. "It is not just the house and the retirement account," Marcus said. "There is a secondary credit card opened under your father's social security number. Victoria is the authorized user. The current balance is $47,000. I closed my eyes. What was it spent on? Luxury hotels, spa services, and Hilton Head 2 Chanel bags, first-class tickets to New York. There is no sign that Gerald knew about it or approved it. I looked back toward the house. Through the second-floor window, the curtain in the primary bedroom moved slightly. Inside was the woman sleeping in my bed using my father's money. Marcus continued, "There is another savings account. Name on it is V. Hale Trust. Balance is $215,000. The money was transferred from the joint account belonging to your father, and Victoria recorded as family expenses." I did the math in my head. The Mount Pleasant house, the retirement account, the credit card, the disguised savings account. Nearly $2 million had been pulled out of my father's life through paperwork signatures and lies. This was no longer the story of an overbearing stepmother. This was a plan. Can we report it to the police? Now, I asked. We can, Marcus replied. But if we do it immediately, Victoria will be warned. She will build another story before we have gathered enough evidence, and your father may not survive the shock well. I understood. My father did not only need his assets saved, he needed to be saved from the truth without having his heart broken any further. That afternoon, Patricia Sloan sent the official report. The signature on the transfer deed was determined to be a simulated forgery with the highest level of probability. Marcus said the conduct could involve forgery, financial fraud, and exploitation of an elderly person with a cardiac history. I sat in silence for a long time. Victoria was in the living room choosing new pillow patterns for my sofa. She thought she was decorating her next home. And I began preparing a file heavy enough that when it was placed on the table, even the most respected room in Charleston would have to fall silent. Marcus asked me where I wanted this to end. In a cold police station where Victoria could cry in front of 2 investigators and call it a family misunderstanding, or on the very stage she had spent her whole life climbing toward. I did not answer right away. I looked through the glass doors and saw Victoria standing on the porch, holding a mimosa, smiling at a new neighbor, as if this house were her reward after years of sacrifice. That smile made me understand one thing. Some people do not fear the courtroom as much as they fear losing their audience. The Low Country Bar Association charity gala. Marcus said. June 14th. Victoria is about to be honored as Philanthropist of the Year. If stolen money flowed into her foundation, that trophy is not an honor. It is evidence plated in gold. From that day on, I divided the plan into 3 parts. From March to April, we gathered evidence. No emotion. No assumptions. Only documents clean enough to stand before a judge, a reporter, and an entire room full of attorneys. Marcus obtained a court order for the bank statements. Patricia completed the forensic document report. I saved every invoice Victoria sent me, from the $6,000 linen sofa to the living room decor expense, she summarized with, "Bonnie, handle this, would you?" I paid. Not because I was weak. Because I needed her comfortable enough to forget to lock the door on her own greed. In May, we protected my father. Marcus quietly prepared documents to move financial oversight to an independent trustee. My father's cardiologist was informed that a major shock might be coming. Everything had to be slow, steady, and humane enough that the truth would not crush him. The final part was the first 2 weeks of June. That was when we needed a public witness. I called Della Fairchild, a veteran editor at Charleston Society Review. She was 52, sharp, familiar with every handshake in Charleston's upper circles, and more importantly, she had been my mother's college roommate. She was one of the last people who visited my mother before she died. When I told her everything, Della was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I have had questions about Victoria for years. She makes large donations, but she never lets anyone see the real books." Della agreed to attend the gala as press, but she gave me one condition. Every document must be independently verified. I will not write a single word just because I care about you. My throat tightened. For the first time in years, an adult was not asking me to stay quiet to protect the family image. She was asking for the truth to be strong enough. And I had that truth. On the morning of June 1st, I woke before sunrise. The whole house was still asleep, but I knew I could not delay any longer. My father needed to know the truth before the night of the gala, not to take revenge on Victoria, but so he would not stand in the middle of that room like a man being betrayed by his own life for the second time. I found him on the porch at 5:45 in the morning. He was sitting alone with a cold cup of coffee, watching seabirds glide over the water. He looked much older than his real age. Not because of his gray hair, but because of too many years spent beside someone who knew how to turn his exhaustion into her power. "Walk with me for a while," I said. My father looked at me, perhaps hearing something in my voice. He did not ask. He simply set down his coffee and followed me along the wooden path leading to the beach. We walked until the house was only a small white shape behind us. When the sound of the waves was loud enough to cover every word, I opened the folder. I showed him the transfer deed for the Mount Pleasant house, the forensic signature report, the bank statements, the V. Hale account, the credit card opened under his social security number, the company Hale Premier Properties listed under Victoria's name. Page by page, I placed everything in my father's hands like shards of glass from a marriage he had once believed was a shelter. My father read very slowly. With every page he turned, his face lost a little more color. At last he stopped at the signature on the transfer deed. His finger touched the name Gerald Beckett, written crookedly beneath the confirmation line. "This is not my signature," he said. His voice was so quiet I almost could not hear it. "I have never heard of this company. I did not authorize these withdrawals. Bonnie, I did not know. I thought I would feel relieved when I heard that, but I did not. It only hurt more. Because in that moment I realized Victoria had not only stolen my father's money, she had stolen his ability to trust his own judgment." My father covered his face with both hands. His shoulders began to shake. A man who had once stood firm through hundreds of legal cases was now sitting on the sand like a child who had just learned he had been deceived for far too long. "I am sorry," he said. "I am sorry I did not protect you." I sat down beside him. "I needed you to protect me. Years ago," I said. "But today, I need you to tell the truth." 2 days later, Marcus notarized my father's statement at his office. My father confirmed that he had never signed the transfer deed, never authorized a credit card to be opened, and never agreed to move money into any account belonging to Victoria. When he finished signing, he looked at me for a long time and said, "Your mother would be proud of you." That night, my father knocked on the door of my small room. In his hands was an old wooden box with a tarnished brass lock. "I found this in Victoria's locked drawer," he said. Inside were 2 yellowed pages. My mother's handwriting. "Bonnie, my brave girl, you do not need anyone's permission to live your own life. You are enough. You have always been enough." Victoria had hidden my mother's final letter from me for 17 years. I pressed the letter against my chest. For the first time, I did not only want her to pay for the money, I wanted her to give back all the years she had made me believe I was not worthy of love. June 14th arrived with a morning so beautiful, it felt almost offensive. The Charleston sky was clear, the sunlight gentle, as if the entire city were trying to pretend no storm was about to pass through the ballroom that night. At 8 in the morning, I was at Marcus's office. A manila envelope lay in the middle of his desk, silent but heavier than any weapon I had ever held. Inside were the forged transfer deed, Patricia Sloane's forensic report bank statements, my father's notarized statement, the Hale Premier Properties records Victoria's old divorce judgment and screenshots of the search history from her iPad. Marcus checked every item one final time. There was no room for error. If I stepped onto that stage tonight, every sentence had to survive attorneys, judges, reporters, and everyone waiting for me to tremble so they could call me a vengeful daughter. "Everything is ready," Marcus said. "Helen Briggs will be there. Della will be in the press section. Judge Holt has been informed." I nodded, but inside my purse, my fingers still touched my mother's letter. That piece of paper was what kept me steady. Not the money. Not the house. My mother's voice, returning after 17 years, locked inside the drawer of the woman who had stolen her place in my family. That afternoon, Victoria stepped out of the primary bedroom in a custom champagne dress. Her hair was swept into an elegant bun, a diamond pendant resting at her throat, her lips painted just softly enough to look humble for the cameras. She looked me up and down. I was wearing a simple black dress and my mother's pearl earrings. "At least try to look like you belong there," she said. I looked straight into her eyes. "Do not worry, Victoria. Tonight everyone will know exactly where I belong." She frowned, but then turned back to the mirror. She had a victory to perform. She did not know the audience had changed the script. If you are also waiting for the moment the truth walks into a crowded room, comment truth. And if you want to keep hearing stories where justice often comes late but never truly disappears, please subscribe to the channel. The grand ballroom of the Belmont Charleston Place glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. 220 guests filled the room, all attorneys, judges, donors, and people who lived by the strength of their reputations. Victoria moved through them like a queen of charity. She shook hands, bowed her head to accept congratulations, and smiled with the expression she had practiced in front of a mirror. I sat at the last table near the service door, exactly where Victoria had placed me. Marcus sat beside me, his document case under his chair. Helen Briggs sat at another table, her silver hair bright in the candlelight. In the press section, Della already had her notebook open. When the host tapped the microphone, Victoria adjusted her dress and smiled. She thought it was the moment her name would be lifted up. In truth, it was the moment every door of escape began to close. The host was just about to introduce the award presentation when Judge Raymond Holt stood up. He walked to the podium, removed his glasses, and placed them on the wooden surface. The room fell silent on its own. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "the association must address a serious matter involving tonight's nominee." Victoria's smile remained on her lips, but her hand tightened around her napkin. Judge Holt looked down at the papers in front of him. "We have received a complaint file containing forensic evidence, notarized testimony, and independently verified financial records. Miss Bonnie Beckett, please come forward." 220 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I stood, took the manila envelope, and walked past each table. My heels echoed against the wooden floor. Victoria looked at me like a door she thought she had locked had suddenly swung open. "Raymond, this is ridiculous," she said. "This is a charity dinner, not a courtroom." "Judge Holt only," replied Miss Beckett. "Please present your statement." I placed the envelope on the podium. My heart was pounding, but my voice did not break. "I am not here to destroy anyone," I said. "I am here because the truth has been hidden for too long." The screen behind me lit up. The transfer deed for the Mount Pleasant house appeared. On April 12, 2024, my father's family home was transferred to Hale Premier Properties, LLC, a company solely owned by Victoria. The signature was listed as my father's, but it was not his signature. The next slide appeared. On one side was the forged signature. On the other were my father's real signatures from his will, his medical power of attorney, and his notarized statement. The difference was clear enough for even the last table to see. From the front row, my father stood. "I did not sign that deed," he said. "I had never heard of that company. I did not authorize the transfer of my home." Victoria spun toward him. "Gerald, tell them you are mistaken." My father looked at her for a long time, then shook his head. I lifted the second set of documents. In 2024, $380,000 was withdrawn from my father's retirement account and transferred into an account under Heil. A secondary credit card was opened using his personal information, and it currently carries a balance of $47,000. Another account holds $215,000 hidden under the label of family expenses. Whispers spread through the room like fire beneath a carpet. Victoria began to cry. "This is a family misunderstanding. Bonnie has always hated me. She is manipulating her father." That was when Helen Briggs stood. My name is Helen Briggs. Victoria did something similar to my former husband in Savannah. In 2009, the divorce judgment clearly stated that she had dissipated marital assets. She raised the certified judgment. The room broke into heavy murmurs. Judge Holt accepted the documents, then announced that the award was being withdrawn immediately. Victoria stood frozen beneath the lights. No one moved toward her. When she turned and walked out, the sound of her champagne-colored heels against the stone floor was like the sound of a final mask falling. After Victoria left the ballroom, I thought everything would feel lighter. But the truth is, some battles do not end when the liar is exposed. They simply move to another stage, where tears can be lit more carefully and lies can be packaged as a pitiful story. That night, my father and I drove back to Sullivan's Island in silence. He sat beside me with both hands resting on his knees, staring out at the dark marshland beyond the window. It was not until we crossed the bridge that he spoke very softly. On Monday, I am filing for divorce. I did not tell him to calm down. I did not say everything would be all right. There are moments when comfort only makes the truth feel smaller. I simply placed my hand over his, so he would know that this time he would not have to walk out of the wreckage alone. When we arrived home, Victoria's belongings were still everywhere. Embroidered towels, makeup bags, the decorative pillows she had bought without permission using my money. But she was gone. For the first time in weeks, the house was so quiet I could clearly hear my father sigh in the living room. At midnight, his phone began vibrating again and again. The first message was pleading. The second was an explanation. The third began blaming me. The final one, sent close to 2 in the morning, contained only one sentence. You will regret this. The next morning, I learned it had not been an empty threat. A local gossip site published an interview with Victoria under a headline claiming that she was a philanthropist publicly humiliated by her husband's stepdaughter. In the article, she called me jealous, unstable, and someone who had hated her from the beginning. She said I had manipulated my father while his health was weak. The comments split quickly. Some people said no one should expose family matters in public. Some called me cruel. Some wrote that I had destroyed a respected woman simply because I had not been loved enough. I read every line and felt an old wound begin to rise again. The instinct to explain, to apologize, to make everyone more comfortable even though I was the one who had been robbed. I called Marcus. He did not let me finish. Do not respond. Do not post anything. Della's article goes live tonight. Let the evidence do its work. At 6 that evening, my phone lit up. Charleston Society Review had published Della Fairchild's investigation. No drama. No pity. Only the truth stacked on top of itself, cold and solid as stone. She published the forged transfer deed, the forensic signature report, redacted bank statements, Judge Holt's confirmation, the corporate records for Hale Premier Properties, and Victoria's old divorce judgment from Savannah. The article did not call her a monster. It did not need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. After just one night, public opinion shifted. The gossip site had to publish an apology. The Low Country Bar Association announced that Victoria's award had been permanently withdrawn and that all collaboration with her charity foundation had been suspended. 3 major donors pulled their commitments. Victoria had lived through her image. And in the end, that very image had nowhere left to hide from the truth. On the Monday morning after everything broke open, my father put on his old Navy suit and walked into Charleston family court. He did not go with Victoria. He carried only a thick file, a letter from his cardiologist, and the face of a man who had finally understood that staying silent for too long was also a betrayal of himself. The divorce petition was filed on the grounds of fraud and dissipation of assets. Marcus had prepared everything. Every account, every transfer deed, every strange expense pinned down, like nails driven into a door, Victoria could no longer open with tears. That same afternoon, Marcus went to the Charleston County Sheriff's Office to file a criminal complaint. The allegations were clearly written. Signature forgery, financial exploitation of an elderly person with a history of heart disease, identity fraud through a credit card, and embezzlement from a charity fund. I read the copy of the complaint and felt no joy. I only felt my heart settle, as if the story had finally been given its proper name. This was not a family conflict. This was a crime. 3 days later, Victoria appeared with her attorney. Her first move was not an apology. It was a settlement offer. Return the money, close, the accounts stay silent, and everyone could walk away as if nearly $2 million had been nothing more than an accounting mistake. Marcus brought the offer to my father and me. My father looked at me. This time he did not look away. No, he said. I want the law to handle it. That was the first time I heard my father choose the truth without needing me to stand in front of him and push. The bank froze the accounts connected to Victoria. The audit of her charity foundation began. More donations were found to have been converted into personal expenses. Private parties had been recorded as fundraising events. Spa visits were disguised as operating costs. One consulting payment flowed straight into the shell company that had once received the Mount Pleasant house. Paige called me on a Thursday night. Her voice was no longer sharp, and it no longer sounded defensive. Can we talk, she asked. Notas enemías. I looked out at the ocean for a long time before I answered. I never saw you as my enemy, Paige. But if you want to step into my life, you have to step in with the truth. I no longer opened the door for anyone carrying Victoria's lies. She was silent. Then very softly she said, I know. That night I sat with my father on the porch. I told him I loved him, but I would not go back to being the easy daughter just so everyone else could feel better. If we wanted a real relationship, it had to be built on honesty. My father nodded, his eyes red, but he did not look away. I am going to therapy, he said. I need to understand why I let myself lose you for so long. I did not forgive him right away. But I heard a door open, and this time no one had used someone else's name to unlock it. 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch of the house on Sullivan's Island again, in the exact chair where I had taken Victoria's call that night. The ocean was still the same. The waves still rolled steadily onto the sand, and the wind still carried the taste of salt. But the woman sitting there was no longer the one whose hands had trembled in the dark. I used to think victory would feel more dazzling. I thought I would feel satisfied when Victoria lost her reputation, lost her award, lost control over my father, and had to face the court. But the truth is not like the movies. When a toxic person leaves your life, the space they leave behind does not instantly become peace. It feels like a room after a storm, scattered and damaged, but at least no one is standing in the middle of it telling you everything is your fault. My father moved into the guest house behind the main property. He finalized the divorce in October. Part of the stolen money had been recovered, and the rest was still moving through the legal process. He went to therapy every week. Some days he came back silent, but it was no longer the silence of avoidance. It was the silence of a man learning to look directly at himself. One evening, my father cooked dinner for the two of us. The fish was dry, the vegetables were too soft, and the sauce was so salty, I had to drink 2 glasses of water. But I ate all of it. Because for the first time in years, my father was not trying to buy back love with one grand apology. He was simply standing in the kitchen, awkward and present. Paige and I met once a month at a coffee shop on King Street. We were not close yet. But she wrote me a letter. In it, she said she had seen the way her mother erased me from the family, and she had stayed silent because that silence benefited her. I read the letter twice. The second time I cried. Not because everything had been repaired, but because someone had finally called my pain by its right name. Victoria was waiting for trial. As for me, I opened my own consulting firm in a small office in Charleston. On my desk, I placed my mother's letter in a glass frame. Every morning I read the final line again. You are enough. You have always been enough. If this story reminds you of a time when you had to protect yourself from your own family, leave a comment for Bonnie. And if you believe that boundaries are not disrespect, but the way a person keeps their soul intact, please subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Tonight, as the sun sinks behind the white roofline, I no longer ask myself whether I deserve to be here. This house is not a gift, not permission, not a reward for having endured long enough. It is proof that I survived. And for the first time in my life, I no longer need anyone to open a door for me. I am home.